everybody. I am Peter Ambler, the Executive Director of Giffords, the gun violence prevention organization founded by my former boss in Congress, actually, former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who is joining us here today on the second stop of our virtual Road to Universal Background Checks tour. Today, we are really excited to touch down in the great state of Michigan and be joined by two amazing Michiganders, a former colleague of Gabby's, and who I'll introduce here in a second, and also a former fellow from, former youth leadership fellow from Giffords, who I'll also introduce in a second. But before I introduce our amazing guests, I want to sort of lead off here by announcing some new polling that we've just put out that looks at attitudes around gun safety in Michigan. And I am excited but not surprised to report that according to our new Giffords poll, 80%, 8 in 10 of Michiganders report supporting and wanting to see become law universal background checks on gun purchases. So, I mean, it's, universal background checks always having near universal support. Gabby, what are the two things that you always find poll just as high as universal background checks?
Ice cream and donuts.
Ice cream and donuts. And I'm sure we're going to want to get into the food scene in Michigan as well. But we have ice cream and donuts freely available. Why not add universal background checks to that list? So let me first introduce Gary Peters, the United States Senator from Michigan. Like I said, a former colleague of Gabby's in the U.S. House. Someone who has devoted all of his life to helping other people. He served as a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy Reserve and has been ranked as one of the most effective and bipartisan members of the U.S. Senate. And I know that sort of commitment to bipartisanship is something that Gabby always held high when she was in the U.S. House, and that is one of our driving values here at Giffords, because gun safety isn't a Democratic or Republican issue. It's an issue that's important to public safety of all Americans. And Gary's number one priority is making sure Michigan families can thrive, whether it's fighting for quality, affordable health care or lower prescription drug prices, defending the Great Lakes, defending Michigan's public schools, standing up for small businesses. Gary is always somebody who puts the state of Michigan, the Michiganders first. And that's why we're so excited about his reelection campaign, why we're doing everything that we can to support him. Because at the end of the day, this is about a fundamental question. Like I said, 8 in 10 Michiganders support universal background checks. Senator Peters has been an extraordinary advocate for that policy while in the United States Congress, something that's, like I said, wildly popular, that's common sense, that's going to protect the safety of kids and communities. But there's a contrast in this race. If we return Senator Peters to the United States Senate, we're going to be one step closer to electing a gun safety majority in the Senate. And if we're able to elect Joe Biden in the White House, we're going to have an opportunity to actually pass universal background checks into law. On the other hand, his opponent, somebody who does not support universal background checks. And you got to ask yourself, why, when you have a policy as common sense and popular and effective as universal background checks, would somebody not support something like that? And, just digging into the data here, you see his opponent, somebody who's taken tens of thousands of dollars from, the gun rights community, from the industry, from the gun lobby. So, perhaps the answer lies there. But let me turn it over to Gary. When it comes to gun safety, somebody who joined his Democratic colleagues in the House in protesting Republican inaction, who's on the floor after the Pulse shooting as part of that expression of support for action on gun safety. Like I said, he's a supporter of universal background checks. Senator, welcome to the Road to Universal Background Checks tour. Unfortunately, Gabby there's nothing she loves more than hitting the road, right? She is like a politician. Somebody loves me out there with the people. Something that I'm sure she would love to be able to do is sample some of Michigan's great food, and maybe even watch you as a fellow motorcycle enthusiast ride across the state on your bike. But why don't you share with us sort of since we can't be there in person, what are we missing?
Well, you miss a lot by not being in Michigan right now. It's gorgeous weather, although right now I'm missing it too, because I'm here in Washington, D.C. We're taking up the National Defense Authorization, which, Gabby, you know how that is as we go through the debate on that. But Michigan, I go back every weekend. I'm home every weekend. Michigan is in its glory right now with great weather. And they'll tell you there's nothing better than being on the Great Lakes, which are just incredible. These are inland seas. Folks, if you haven't seen them, you've got to see them because they're amazing. And for us as Michiganders, next to our people, it's the most important resource. So it is something I focus on every day to make sure the Great Lakes stay vibrant and healthy for future generations. It's important to remember that 40 million people drink water out of the Great Lakes. So we've got to keep them clean. And they're an incredible recreational resource. And as you're doing that, you can travel around all our great towns and sample amazing food and craft brews and really enjoy a great stay.
Well, you had me at craft brews, but
we've got some amazing ones. In fact, we're one of the leaders in the state in that. And as our craft brewers will tell you, in order to make good beer, you have to have great water. And that's why we have great water in the Great Lakes.
That's true. Water's life. Well, can't wait to get there when we're able to actually travel. But so excited to be there virtually today, and most importantly to be with you, and looking forward to sort of a broader conversation further in the program. I'm now going to move along and introduce another great Michigander, Elizabeth Lancaster, who is actually the youth has been such a big part of the gun violence prevention movement, and especially in the aftermath of the horrific Parkland shooting, has really led the way. And when you find yourself being led by young people, I think that really speaks to the failure of the political establishment that we're here with Senator Peter trying to fight against. The people who have stood in the way of common sense laws like universal background checks that the Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump, and others are stopping from becoming law. So Elizabeth, you've worked with Giffords before. You're a tremendous leader in Michigan and nationally on the gun safety issue. Can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself, like what got you into this issue, and what everybody needs to know about Elizabeth Lancaster?
Yeah, so I'm Elizabeth. I'm a young person first and foremost. So I'm a 20-year-old college student at Michigan State University. But like most of my peers, I did get my start after the Parkland shooting. So I was one of the student organizers of the Grand Rapids March for Our Lives, which one thing that really shocked all of the student volunteers in that event was that it was the biggest march or rally in Grand Rapids history at the time, which just goes to show that gun violence prevention is something that is super popular, even in swing states. But then after that, I went on to Michigan State University and founded a student organization called Students Against Gun Violence. So we're primarily focused on advocating for common sense gun policies. We do think it's a great advantage that we get to be so close to Lansing. So we do have access to the Capitol, which is really important. But then one thing that's also super important to us is changing MSU's gun policy, because we're actually the only major public university in the state that allows visitors to have guns on campus. Most universities have just banned firearms altogether, but we have what we refer to as the MSU loophole. So that's been the main thing that I've been focused on, but then also just invigorating young people all across the country, I think is super important. It's a super important initiative to get behind.
And universal background checks. And of course, great Michigan beer and ice cream. And
yeah, of course.
Yeah. Of course. Well, I want to do now my favorite thing in the whole world, which is introduce Gabby herself. And She needs no introduction, but she's somebody who has, for so many people, led the fight for common sense, gun safety reform, to put in place laws like universal background checks that are going to keep us as a country safer. It's easy in this fight, which has spanned so many years, to get frustrated, to think that victory is out of reach. But Gabby is somebody who reminds us every single day to keep on fighting. And in large part because of that fight, because of the millions of people around the country that have joined that fight, we are, in fighting distance of actually getting meaningful legislation signed into law. If over the next 3.5 months, we're able to win a handful of US Senate races and obviously the race for the White House, we're going to be in a position to have Gabby, have Senator Peters standing next to President Joe Biden signing universal background checks into law. And that's something that we were really excited about. But I want to sort of tee up a video that sort of speaks to Gabby's fight and the opportunity that we have to make generational historic change.
What is courage? What does it look like? Courage shows truth to power and stands its ground. It's walking out. It's sitting down. It's marching towards something greater. Courage is telling your story even when it's hard to speak. Courage looks like this.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Gabby Giffords from Southern Arizona.
You can either complain about something or you can try to fix it.
I will always extend my hand across the aisle to do what's right for the American people, to build consensus, and to get the job done.
Earlier today, a number of people were shot in Tucson, Arizona.
Arizona Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, wounded in an assassination attempt just about 2 weeks ago, is about to take the next big step along what's expected to be a long road to recovery.
It takes courage to keep going, especially when it feels impossible.
Than to witness the return of our colleague, who is the personification of courage, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords.
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
It's standing up and finding your voice again. Courage is speaking out. Courage is saying, we can do better. And knowing no problem is too big to fix.
Great. That was so inspirational, Gabby. You are such an example of courage and determination. We would love to hear from you.
I've known the darkest of days of pain and uncertain recovery. But confronted by despair, I've summoned hope. Confronted by paralysis and aphasia, I respond with grit and determination. I put one foot in front of the other. I found one word and then I found another. My recovery is a daily fight, but fighting makes me stronger. Words once came easily. Today I struggle to speak, but I have not lost my voice. America needs all of us to speak out, even when you have to fight to find the words. I'm also in a second fight, the fight to stop gun violence. It's also a fight forged by tragedy and pain, a fight where hard work pays off, a fight that can change lives. We are at a crossroads. We can let the shooting continue, or we can act. We can protect our family, our future. We can vote. We can be on the right side of history. Please join us in this fight. Vote, vote, vote. Thank you very much.
Gabby, thank you so much for that inspiration. I think it really, it means so much to see someone like you fighting hard, just to be able to join us here today, and really kind of frames the stakes here.
Thank you.
I think it tells people in Michigan and across the country, what we need to do to prevent, future acts of gun violence from happening. So, we want to also take some time for Q&A. So, depending what platform you're on, Facebook, Twitter, etc., please enter your questions. Use the hashtag Gun Safety Congress. But Senator, I'm going to start with a question for you. Michigan is obviously a big state. It's a diverse state. We've got cities that have, Black and brown communities that are disproportionately impacted by gun violence, and also growing suburbs where support for common sense gun safety laws is on the rise. And then you also have more rural areas where you have, strong traditions of gun ownership and hunting. This is, I don't want to oversimplify this, but obviously these are dynamics that you have across the country. Like Gabby is a gun owner. You are also a gun owner, and somebody who is, brought the focus on this issue to both sort of protecting, Second Amendment rights, and also doing whatever we can to reduce gun violence. So can you just talk a little bit about, how this issue of gun safety and background checks affects Michigan in its diversity, and what's at stake in your race in November?
Well, I'm happy to take that. Thank you, Peter, and thank you for your leadership. Thank you for hosting this and putting this event together. And if I may just say this before I give the answer, I want to just say something to Gabby about how honored I am to be with you here today, and for your leadership going forward. I had the privilege, for those of you on the call, I think Peter mentioned, of serving with Gabby when I was a newly elected member of the House. I remember you from really one of the first days. I mean, those of us who know Gabby, you can see it here today. She is filled with energy. She's filled with passion. People naturally just gravitated to Gabby, and I loved talking to her. And then, of course, the tragedy. If I just a personal experience, we remember things that really move us, and events that hit us in our lives. And I remember the day of the shooting, Gabby, when you were shot. I remember vividly. I was actually, I was waiting for my daughter to come out from a theater class, and the news came across that you were shot, and we didn't know what was going to happen. And I remember being quite moved by that. And she came in the car and wondered what was going on with Dad, because I was shedding tears. And it was a scary time and a horrible time. And I know the whole country was with you through a very, very tough time. And to see how you have just powered through this crisis, you have just indomitable energy, and you take this horrible thing that happened to you, and you are fighting so that it doesn't happen to other people. I mean, this is just who you are. You're just an amazing person. Thank you for leading this fight. Thank you for being such a champion, because we need you, and we need to make this change. And to the question, Peter, is that how could we not act on this when you look at the number of folks who die every year? The country is often captivated with mass shootings that are horrible. They're horrific. And we wonder how that can happen. But we also have to remember that these deaths, these needless deaths with gun violence, happen every single day. We may not get news stories today, but 100 people or more are going to die today to gun violence. You're going to have 36,000 plus people over the course of this year. In Michigan, 1,200 people are going to die from gun violence. Now, we may not be able to prevent all of that, but we can prevent a lot of it. And every life is precious. We have to lean in and pass legislation. I'm proud to have worked to expand and to correct the registry system, which is the background check system. If you're going to check background, you have to know exactly that data is accurate. And so we've been able to make progress with your efforts and others to get that. But now we got to take the next step. We actually have to use that information and have a comprehensive background check so that people can't get around it and go to a gun show or buy it online. And we hear too many stories of folks who are able to use those loopholes and then commit tragic killings. And maybe if they didn't go through that, we would save lives. I'm confident we would save lives. We would save so many lives by just passing this legislation. And as mentioned in Michigan, 80% of folks support this. As you talked about ice cream and Michigan, our Coney dogs are probably got 80% approval. Nothing in politics, very few things in politics have 80% approval, and yet we can't get it done. And the reason we can't get it done is because Mitch McConnell will not put it on the floor of the Senate. Yeah. This is why elections matter. We've got to make sure that we take control of the Senate, have a majority so we can put this on the floor. And that's the way the process is supposed to work. If you want to vote against it, go ahead and do it. If you want to vote for it, do it. That is what the United States Senate is supposed to be. We're supposed to be the great deliberative body. And yet we are prevented from putting on the floor a piece of legislation that has 80+% support in the state of Michigan, and a piece of legislation that will literally save thousands of lives. It is unconscionable that we're not doing it. That's why we're here today. We understand the stakes are so high in this election on so many issues, but this one in particular is one that needs action. We must take action. Thank you for your leadership, and I'm committed to see this through when reelected to the U.S. Senate.
That's fantastic, Senator. Thank you so much for really framing the decision point here, because you're absolutely right. And I think the reason perhaps that they're not allowing a vote on an up or down vote on universal background checks on the Senate floor is because it is so popular, because they know that if they were to allow an up or down vote, that it would immediately pass, because nobody wants to go on the record against this thing, right? That's why, Republican politicians, these days they cash their checks from the NRA, the gun lobby, and other special interests, and try as hard as they can to avoid talking about the issue, because they don't want to be where they are, which is on the wrong side of history and the wrong side of where families are, because people care about the safety of their kids and communities. And speaking of that, Elizabeth, I want to sort of talk about the advocacy that you've engaged in and that you've been a big leader of. And obviously, the gun violence epidemic is now happening in the midst of the COVID pandemic. And you might think that would have led to a reduction in gun violence. It's actually not true. While overall crime has declined in the midst of this pandemic, gun violence has actually shot up. And there are millions of Americans, millions of Michiganders who are living every day with the threat of gun violence, even in the midst of this horrific pandemic. But can you tell me, Elizabeth, just a little bit about how you are engaging in advocacy and being creative to find new ways to reach people during an age of social and physical distancing?
Yeah, so I think, one of the most heartbreaking parts about what's going on right now is that since we're quarantining, a lot of people have to go home to unsafe environments that are maybe unsafe because of family members or community members or, whatever it may be. So yeah, gun violence really isn't going down because having guns in homes can increase the risk of violent domestic violence or suicide attempts and things like that are just really horrifying and heartbreaking. So it's really important that right now, even though there's so much else going on, that we stay focused and remember what we're doing and why we're doing it, because it's still an epidemic right now. Gun violence is still a problem. It's not going away. But then we sort of have this triple threat going on of gun violence, the COVID pandemic, and then also Black Lives Matter protests that have been going on across the country. So I think right now is a time when a lot of young people specifically are sort of starting to realize that there are a lot of problems in this country that we have to stand up against and that we ultimately have to fix. So one of the most important things I think that we can do right now is reaching out to young people, whether that's on social media or whatever it may be, because we are such a digital generation. It's super important to be focusing on these digital initiatives right now, since we can't, be hosting events or going door to door like we used to be able to. So we have to be able to adapt for the younger generation, for the pandemic. But then I think also just reaching out to young people, making sure that they know that they have power in their voice. I think that's super important, especially since right now it can seem like such a helpless time where a lot of people might feel like they don't have a voice or they don't have power, but we still do. We have, if not even more power right now, to make sure that our voices get heard and make sure that what we care about is being taken seriously on a state or national level.
That's really insightful and awesome to hear, Elizabeth. And I wanted to say a quick thing about that sense of powerlessness, right? Mm-hmm. We cannot give into that, because that is what the gun lobby, that is their sales pitch. What the gun lobby with NRA leadership is what their only play is powerlessness. They want us to think that gun violence is as inevitable as tornadoes or earthquakes or any number of sort of natural disasters, that there's not anything that we can do about it. But of course, we know that we can do things, like the senator said. Even with Donald Trump as president, Mitch McConnell as majority leader, the politics have shifted so much that the senator was able to pass the Fix NICS Act, legislation to improve the background check system. So, there are things that we can do, concrete, common sense, popular things we can do that are going to actually save lives. So we cannot be powerless. We cannot give into that. We have 3.5 months ahead of us before the biggest election of our lives, and we got to elect Senator Peters and send a message to the rest of the country that, we're not going to put up with 40,000 people dying from gun violence anymore. And to sort of further kind of illustrate this choice ahead of us, I'd like to cue up another video that speaks to this fight for universal background checks.
For the first time since the Clinton administration, the House of Representatives passes significant gun legislation.
This bill would basically require background checks for almost every gun sale or gun transfer in America.
Enough is enough. And our first order of business in the Senate should be to pass the House Background Checks Act.
As long as I'm the majority leader of the Senate, none of that stuff is going anywhere. I am indeed the Grim Reaper.
Over 90% of Americans support expanding background checks.
By closing these loopholes, we will make our communities safer.
We have a mission. We have an obligation. It is the right thing to do to save lives.
The Senate is a firewall for the NRA.
And change must come to Washington.
There are now more activists on the side of gun safety than on the side of the NRA.
Now is the time to come together. Be courageous. The nation's counting on you.
Senator, that video, portrayed something powerful and, of course, timely. Something that we benefited from in the fight for gun violence prevention has been the leadership of John Lewis. And I know you served with him, as did Gabby. But what is seeing that in this video right now in this fight? How does that make you feel? What does that say to you?
Well, it says a lot. As you mentioned, Gabby and I were privileged to be able to serve with John Lewis, and it's a big loss that we experienced with his passing. But his legacy is going to live on for generations. And you heard his powerful voice in that video, and those are the kind of memories that I have of him. I remember the kind of man he was, that he cared about folks. I remember it as being a new member of Congress and got to know him, and he remembers your name. There are a couple hundred of us, so it's hard to learn folks. But John Lewis took the time to get to know who we were. And every time you went up to John Lewis to talk to him about an issue, first he had to know how you were doing, how your family's doing, and he'd ask, how are things in Michigan? And, a lot of times we do that kind of in a perfunctory way. You could tell that wasn't that way. He genuinely wanted to know how things are, because that was just the kind of man that he was. And he sometimes was quiet, but when he spoke, everybody listened. I remember vividly, I'm sure Gabby remembers these, we have our caucus meetings, and there's a lot of commotion, and people aren't necessarily listening to all the speakers, except when John Lewis stood up. When he stood up to speak, we all listened. I will always remember an impassioned speech he made to expand healthcare in this country and to pass the Affordable Care Act. I mean, this is something that he saw as a civil rights issue, that everybody in this country, no matter who they are, no matter where they live, should have access to quality, affordable healthcare. And he also believed passionately that we need to have gun safety laws. And I was privileged to be able to be in a sit-in with him that he organized on the House floor to say enough is enough. It is time for action. So we have to celebrate that legacy. The best way that I know to celebrate that legacy is to pass this background check legislation, something that he fought for so long, something that we have to do, and something that now Gabby has been doing an incredible job in leading. And Gabby, I know you would much rather be out on the road. This is a lot different for you to be on virtual calls because you are such a people person, and two-dimensional people are not the same as three-dimensional people. So I know you'd want to be out with us and out on the road. And I know you love motorcycling, but I think just on a personal charge, what are you doing to keep yourself busy now when you have free time? I realize that doesn't happen very often, but what do you do in your free time?
I'm so busy. A lot of Zoom call. Work. Yoga twice a week, French horn, Spanish lesson, riding my bike, walking on my treadmill, watching movies. It's Groundhog Day.
That's great.
Oh, wow, Gabby. I mean, you're putting us to shame. A musical instrument in a second language. You make me feel bad about myself here. Thank you for sharing that. Now let's get into questions from our viewers and supporters. Senator Peters, I got a question for you, and to everybody else again, please submit your questions on the platform, on Facebook, on Twitter, whatever platform you're watching on. Use the Gun Safety Congress hashtag, please. But Senator Peters, this question comes to you from Alex, who says, I am a gun owner, and so are a lot of my friends and family, but many don't agree with my politics. How can I talk to them about things like background checks in a way that makes them understand that we are not coming for their guns?
Well, Alex, thanks for that question. And I can assure you that no one is coming for your family's guns. That's not what this is about. This is about common sense gun safety. I think you mentioned, Peter, in the opening, I'm a gun owner. I know Gabby's a gun owner. I enjoy shooting sports. In the U.S. Navy Reserve, I learned to handle weapons. I'm qualified as a marksman of the M16 and the 9mm pistol. I enjoy hunting. I love bird hunting. Every fall gets me out doing bird hunting. So I love my shotgun and doing trap shooting, skeet shooting, and shooting sports generally. And it started as a youngster, back in my days as a Boy Scout, where my favorite time during summer camp was going out to the shooting range and learning how to shoot. So it is something I care very deeply about. It is something that is clearly ingrained in Michiganders. We love the outdoors. We love outdoor sports. Folks love hunting. It is hard sometimes to find people around during when deer season starts because folks want to be out there very early. So you got to make sure you talk to folks before they head to the North Woods. That's not what this is about. This is about making sure that we are moving forward with a safer environment, that we can check backgrounds for folks who simply should not have a weapon for a variety of reasons. It's about protecting them. It's about protecting innocent folks. It's about preventing folks, perhaps in the heat of passion, that they do something that they come to seriously regret later. And we know this works. Where these checks are in place, it prevents these senseless, needless tragedies from occurring. And I believe that this has to be a bipartisan issue. This is not a partisan issue. This is not a blue issue or a red issue. This is about us coming together in a bipartisan way. I take great pride in working in a bipartisan way. In fact, the Lugar Center out of Georgetown University, they rank us all based on bipartisanship. I'm the fourth most bipartisan Democratic senator. In fact, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce just awarded me their Hamilton Jefferson Award for bipartisanship. This is where we should find common ground. There are things that it's going to be tough, and there are some big debates. This is not one of them. We should be able to find common ground because this is common sense. And not only is it common sense, it saves lives, thousands of lives. And we know that our folks back home, depending on your state, 80, 90% of the folks support it as well. So if you believe in truly representing your state, you will support to have these kinds of common sense legislation and have comprehensive background checks. Has got to be front and center. And when that passes, I'm going to continue to enjoy shooting sports. I'm going to continue to enjoy hunting. But I also know that we're going to have a safer community, and thousands of people, their lives will be saved as well.
The legislation is literally called H.R. 8, the Bipartisan Background Checks Act. So you can't get any more bipartisan than that, especially with 80% of Michiganders supporting this legislation. I have another audience question, this one to you, Elizabeth, which comes from Janelle, who writes, the NRA spends millions of dollars on elections. How can we fight back?
Yeah, I mean, the NRA has millions of dollars, but we have millions of people. Like, this is an issue that clearly a majority of the people are on side of it. I mean, Michigan is a swing state, and 80% of Michiganders support universal background checks. That single-handedly proves that this should be a bipartisan issue and is something that anybody can mobilize around, Democrats or Republicans. So I think one thing that we really have to do is getting people out to vote, getting people to really care about this issue, because it is quite literally life or death. This is something that needs to be passed urgently. So we need to make sure that people realize that we have to actually vote for politicians who will actually represent the people, because politicians or candidates who don't support universal background checks, frankly, don't support a majority of what the people actually support. So the best way that we can counteract the millions of dollars that the NRA puts into candidates and politicians is to get people out to vote and getting people to care about this, and support the issues that seriously matter to people.
That's absolutely right. And I couldn't have said it any better myself, which is not shocking because I'm rarely better than anybody else. That's why we have amazing advocates like you and amazing leaders like the senator and like Gabby on the Zoom here with us. But you're right. It's all about people. It's about a movement of everyday Americans, people marching in the streets, but also sitting at the kitchen table. And talking about the commitment to safety that comes with responsible gun ownership, which the senator talked about, right? And just simply wanting that commitment to safety reflected in our laws to make sure that our laws aren't going to let anybody get their hands on a gun that our common sense wouldn't let get their hands on a gun, right? So that we're protecting our communities from everyday gun violence. So we're protecting our kids from school shootings. And so, yeah, thank you, Elizabeth, for helping lead that movement of activists. Gabby, we have one more audience question for you. This one is from Carol. And Carol writes, Gabby, you are a role model and inspiration to so many of us. Who has inspired and motivated you to be who you are today?
John Lewis, the civil rights leader.
Yeah.
I'm sad. End of an era. Fight fight every day.
I think you're absolutely right. That, continuing to fight for gun violence prevention, for racial equity and justice, for all of the sort of flames of justice that he held up so high is how we can best honor his legacy.
Thank you.
And, Senator, I think about the sit-in in the House, which John Lewis led and which you participated in, the filibuster in the Senate in 2016. And, there are so many moments in this fight for safer gun laws that have had an impact, but that's an underappreciated. I mean, there's so many parts of John Lewis's career, right, that have paved the way for historic progress. But his leadership and yours, frankly, in calling for common sense gun safety laws, for calling on Americans and politicians to overcome the influence of the gun lobby and pass universal background checks, is a candle that's going to keep on burning for a long time. And I think in the months ahead, we're going to win some important elections, and come 2021, be able to pass universal background checks in the law that is going to help save so many lives. Okay. As we're wrapping up here, I want to give our fantastic panelists some more opportunity to speak. So, Elizabeth, I'm going to first turn it over to you and see if you've got any sort of final words of inspiration from the perspective of the youth to offer us.
Yeah.
Before we turn it over to Senator Peters to close us out.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of young people feel like their voice doesn't matter, or that they don't even have a voice in the first place. I know a lot of people, young people specifically, feel left behind in politics, but I think that's why it's that much extra important that we do get involved in politics and make sure that our voices get heard. So, I mean, everybody's talking about the presidential election coming up, but I think it's equally important for young people to get involved in their state elections or their local elections or their Senate elections, and just make sure that they're making sure that their friends vote, making sure that their friends are registered to vote, making sure people have rides to go and vote, or in this case, have an absentee ballot or something like that. And then also just volunteering as much as they can, talking to their family as much as they can in their communities. I think that's super important, just to make sure that young people actually get engaged, because we do have a voice and our voice does matter, and we have to use the power that we do have.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Senator Peters, you've been just such an inspiring example of bipartisanship, an example of how our institutions and our leaders should work to benefit the lives of regular people, to use policy as an instrument for improving people's lives. So thank you for that. And just let me turn it over to you to sort of help frame how we should be thinking about the next 3.5 months in Michigan and the road ahead.
Well, thank you. Thank you again, Peter, for hosting this and for moderating this discussion. It's been an honor. And Gabby, it is so wonderful to see you again. Hopefully the next time I see you, it will be face-to-face, person and not via Zoom. But it's your smile is as infectious as it always has been. So thank you for keeping up the fight and all that you do. And Elizabeth, wonderful to be with a fellow Michigander on this call and feel your passion as well. And you're right about we have to make sure that our voice is heard. And we know the best way for our voice to be heard is at the ballot box, is that we have to vote. Elections do matter. And on this issue in particular, it's clear on how elections matter, because even if the overwhelming majority in public opinion polls say this is something we should do, if you elect the wrong people who don't listen to the majority, the vast majority of folks in their state, this is what we get. We get inaction, complete inaction on something that we need to take action on, which is dealing with common sense gun safety legislation. This election is pivotal, and if I can talk a little bit about Michigan, we know that Michigan is somewhat the center of the universe this year. It is an absolute must-win in the presidential race. This is a key battleground race. I think it's impossible for someone to be president of the United States if they don't win Michigan. may not be sufficient condition, but clearly necessary. So this will be hotly contested in that race. And my Senate race is also one of the top races in the country because I'm one of 2 Democrats in a state that voted for Donald Trump. And we have to hold this seat. The good news is that we have a real shot to take the majority in the U.S. Senate. And I would argue the Senate in a lot of ways is even more important than the presidency. And just think of President Obama and how he tried to do so much, and Mitch McConnell stood in the way of so much of his positive efforts going forward, including the nomination of a Supreme Court justice, which is pretty outrageous, which is why we have to take the majority in the Senate. The good news is we've got a real path. It's narrow, and Gabby's going to travel that path to all of these key Senate races around the country to win. And I'm excited about that. But as we are trying to flip seats, we all have to remember that if we lose Michigan, it gets a whole lot more difficult to take the majority in the Senate. You have to keep what you have. And that's why I certainly need the support of everybody on this call and watching. People who share our passion on this issue have to know, as Peter mentioned, my opponent is 100% opposite of where we are. And he would not support this. He would be one of those people who would ignore the 80% of folks in the state who believe that common sense gun safety legislation needs to pass. So elections matter. I need your support. I need your help. We've got to get out on the streets. We've got to make sure our voice is loud. And as we make sure that voice is loud, we can scream a little bit louder as we fill out our absentee ballot or go to the polls and drop it in the ballot box, because that's how we're going to make a difference. And I'm confident if we all come together as one, when everybody watches the election results on election night, they're going to see that Michigan is indeed a blue state because we all came together to make it so. And as a result of that, we now have Joe Biden as president, and we have a Democratic majority in the Senate that will put common sense gun legislation, not just on the floor, but will actually pass it as well. And that will be a great day.
Thank you so much, Senator. I'm hoping that the next time we see you in person is at the bill signing ceremony for universal background checks. I'm going to say it a little bit more plainly. If we do not reelect you, there's no path to universal background checks. Gun safety is on the ballot in Michigan, in your race, Senator, and the presidential level as well. So it is vitally important that everybody watching this that's tuned in today during our virtual Michigan stop on the Road to Universal Background Checks tour, goes to your website, go to petersformichigan.com. Again, petersformichigan.com. Sign up with your email and your cell phone, volunteer for the campaign, please donate. The NRA and the gun lobby, they're going to be deploying millions of dollars across the country. We need to put our small dollars, the dollars of activists, of the millions of regular people who support Senator Peters and other gun safety advocates into these campaigns so we can overcome these special interests and communicate directly with the people about the values that we share. I'm going to put in a very specific pitch for your swag, Senator. I regret that I found out about it so late. If I would have ordered some to wear on this on this tour stop had I seen it before. But it's pretty cool. So Gabby and I are going to definitely pick some up. Elizabeth, you should check that out too.
I will.
Get all your friends decked out in Peters for Senate swag. It's some of the coolest gear I've seen on the campaign circuit. But most importantly, vote, because that's what we depend on. We've seen an incredible evolution in the politics of gun safety over the past several years. It used to be that politicians were scared of the NRA. It used to be that politicians thought that the politics of this issue were too difficult, that the gun lobby was going to be decisive in these elections. Today, the opposite is true. You've got courageous politicians like Senator Peters willing to do what is right to protect the people of his state and other Americans. I know as part of this tour, the panelists here on this broadcast and everybody tuning in is a big part of that movement. We like to say that this is a movement, not a moment, right? To sort of speak to the generational, historic, cause that we carry so high. But I'm looking forward to one big moment come next year. We're going to win some elections, and we're actually going to pass legislation that is going to make Americans safer. So, Elizabeth, thank you so much for your advocacy and for the advocacy of your friends and fellow activists. Senator, thank you so much. You do every day for the people of Michigan and being for such a fine example for all Americans to look up to. You're what I think we all want when we think of people that we should be electing. And Gabby, of course, thank you for your courage and leadership. It's a real pleasure to call you a friend and fellow advocate. And with that, I will let you all go about your days. Thanks again, and on to universal background check.
On to victory. On to victory.
Thank you.
Thank you.